This is Karina's column, and we're very honoured today to have General Ben Hodges with us. He's the commanding general of US troops in Europe. Now, General Hodges has been at the epicenter of events, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Korea. He's been absolutely everywhere, and in 2014, he was made the commanding general of US troops in Europe. He could have expected a nice quiet time, but of course in 2014 you had the Russian invasion of Crimea and Ukraine. He's been very involved in Europe for the last 5 years and 37 years in the army, and it's a great pleasure for us to interview him today. General, as I interview you in September 2017, North Korea looks like the biggest threat to global stability. But what are the other ones?
Well, there are multiple threats all around us, of course, which is part of why NATO, our great alliance, is so important. We have to be prepared to deal with multiple threats. Of course, Russia and its behavior over the last 3 years is the only nation that really possesses the capability to destroy a European country or the United States, their nuclear weapons. So in terms of an existential threat, that's Russia. Now, that's not likely, but that's a part of it. Iran having nuclear weapons now, potentially developing nuclear weapons, that causes a real problem. And when you think about sort of the proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia that's taking place up in Syria and that part of the world, that's a problem for us. Islamic extremism is something that we're going to all be dealing with for the rest of our life. Terrorist attacks, they're horrible, they kill innocent people, but those should not be seen as destabilizing. They certainly are not existential, but we're going to be dealing with them for, I think, on into the next century for sure.
And with Korea, I mean, you've been based in Korea, you're obviously very current with what's happening there. I mean, for most of us who are not in military circles, it's looking pretty scary right now.
It is very concerning. You've got a very large North Korean army. You've got a leader who is clearly not concerned about being loved by the rest of the world. He's firing missiles over Japan. He's talked about threatening Guam, which is a U.S. possession in the Pacific. They have a lot of capability in North Korea, and they appear willing to use it. That doesn't mean they will. So in the South, the Republic of Korea, the ROK Army, very, very good, very professional, well equipped. The United States Army, as well as Marines, Navy, and Air Force are there. A lot of exercises going on right now. So it's concerning. I think the commanders out there are doing all the prudent things you would expect in terms of preparation in case. But my president and our ambassador to the United Nations, Ambassador Haley, has talked about repeatedly the importance of using all other means, sanctions, different types of sanctions, keeping political pressure on North Korea, but also on China. China has the most important role here, I think. China does not want a war in Korea because they will inherit all the debris and the disaster that would fall out from it. But also, I don't think that China wants a unified Korea that would possibly become an American ally the way that South Korea is. So they've got to figure out their role. I think so far, my president would say that, or has said that China has not done all that they could.
Is there a reason why we should come out with some sort of assurance that we're not looking for a unified Korea?
Well, I think that's an interesting point. The policy, of course, has always been the Republic of South Korea. So we support talks between North Korea and South Korea. I mean, there's a structure in place where the nations are talking to each other about how they coexist. But I would not be the expert on whether or not there is what the U.S. policy is with regards to a ultimate or eventual reunification of Korea. I think the U.S. policy has always been self-determination by the people of a country.
Let's move to Europe then. I mean, what's very interesting about NATO is that Turkey And NATO and the EU have been very integrated forever. But Turkey, we've now had the German Chancellor pretty much saying what we all knew, which is Turkey will not be joining the EU. Turkey has gone against every EU rule there is. And also it has been accused of interfering in the upcoming German election. I mean, there's a long list. Should Turkey really still be a member of NATO?
So a couple of points. First, the alliance is much better with Turkey than without Turkey. It's been a loyal member of the alliance since it joined in 1952. Very good professional military. The geographic location, obviously, on the Black Sea, the Caucasus, the Eastern Mediterranean, it's essential for the alliance for so much that we have to do in that part of the world. They're very important. So, look, each member of NATO irritates other members. The United States irritates people. Germany irritates people. UK irritates. So that's kind of the nature of a coalition or alliance anyway, is that at times there'll be problems. But the fact is we are more effective as an alliance with Turkey than we would be without Turkey. If I could slightly take on what you said about the German Bundeskanzler and Ms. Merkel. It was her opponent, Mr. Schultz, is the one that said, if I'm elected, and of course, German elections coming up around 24 September, absolutely, Turkey will not be allowed in the EU. We should not continue the talks. What Bundeskanzler Merkel has said was a little bit more nuanced about, she had, I think, a broader, keep the door open, but obviously these other things are unacceptable that, whether it was Turkish participation in German elections or involvement of some sort like that. It is a challenge. I think that Turkey knows that their future is with the West. They may buy weapons from Russia. They depend on Russia for energy, as does half of Europe. But their real, true economic prosperity depends on the West, not Russia.
With NATO, we had the sort of peace dividend at a certain point, and that's now obviously it's not there. What we're really looking at is a change in NATO's strategy where it is moving forward. Now, partly people are saying, well, it's all very well moving troops forward, but the truth is, really, in this day and age, it's all about cyber attacks.
So the alliance made a decision last summer at the NATO summit in Warsaw, July of 16, that we had to make a transition from assurance to deterrence because of Russian behavior. That includes the full range of conventional capability, air policing, more forward deployed troops in the so-called enhanced forward presence battle groups. The UK, of course, is the lead nation up in Estonia for that, just like Canada and Latvia, Germany and Lithuania, and the United States and Poland. But we are in a cyber environment. It touches everything we do. It's no doubt, it's undisputed that Russia is putting pressure on nations, individuals, on organizations through the use of cyber. It is out there. So we are working very hard to protect our networks, protect our systems. At the same time, we're also trying to become more interoperable. So you've got a tension between how do you protect your networks and systems, at the same time opening them up enough so that you can have a French commander over British troops, Polish commander over American troops, that you can communicate with each other in a what will be is a very heavily contested environment in terms of cyber and electronic warfare. That is now an essential part of what we do, just as in the older days we would have talked about integration of air and land forces together. The cyber domain is on the front of everybody's mind.
What about that 2% goal? Every NATO member is meant to spend 2% of their GDP on some sort of on defense. But this has been a major issue with the US, and you might call it a little irritant in the coalition. But I know the president had thought it was rather more than that, but without being political, because I know you can't be, do you think that there's a need to reinterpret that? Because, as we've just talked about, cyber is part of it. There's much more in this 2%, and there should be a change in the definition.
What the 2% is not a goal. That was a commitment that the nations all made at the NATO summit at Wales back in 2014. And I can say, because of that commitment, and frankly, leadership of Secretary General Stoltenberg, you can see almost every nation in the alliance has either moved towards that 2%, has achieved it, or at least has stopped the decline. Almost every nation of the 29. That's very important because that demonstrates a commitment to collective security. Of course, every American president, I think since President Truman, has called on allies to do more. And so the fact that President Trump did that, President Obama referred to several European nations as free riders, you'll remember. So this is not a new thing. I think what maybe is new is that you've got this happening against the backdrop of what Russia is doing and all the other threats that we've talked about. So there's an awakening or a reawakening that nations have to do their part to be prepared. It's not just having a U.S. plus one or two other countries providing the bulk of security capability. Now, 2%. Inside that, that's 2% of the GDP used for defense. And of that 2%, 1/5 of it is supposed to be for weapons procurement modernization. So that was a specification within the 2%. I should also point out, this was done in 2014, the nations gave themselves 10 years to get to that. Here we are in 2017, just 3 years later, and already several countries have reached that 2%. Poland, Romania, almost all three of the Baltic countries will be there by the end of next year. Estonia already is. So there is a lot of movement. Of course, UK is a 2%er. Now, what makes up that 2%? Some have said, well, healthcare, education, foreign aid, these also are part of defense. I don't think that's in the spirit of what the Allies agreed to. I think we're talking more specific defense, security type investments. Cyber absolutely is a part of that, improving your ability to defend yourself, your networks, and that, in my view, would absolutely be included in that. I do think there is some room for, say, like infrastructure. Without rail, without railheads, without bridges that can support the weight of a British Challenger tank or an American Abrams tank or a German Leopard, we have a challenge. Missile defense, logistics, transport, these are some things that I think are an important part of it. The UK is launching 2 magnificent aircraft carriers. I don't know if they have enough sailors to man both aircraft carriers. I think this is important. It's the whole equipment, manning or structure, and then maybe the most important in my view is the readiness. If you've got thousands of tanks or airplanes, but no money to pay for pilot training or for fuel and ammunition to practice, I think I would rather err on the side of having a small army that's very well prepared.
Now, what you've just brought up is quite interesting because there is a view in this country that we have an ever diminishing armed forces. We're going to end up with about 65,000 at a time of huge insecurity.
I would say that the British Army has the same challenge that the American Army has. Not enough resources to do everything it's asked to do. Even the United States Army is stretched with requirements in the Middle East and Africa and Europe that people are meeting themselves coming and going on rotations for extended periods of time. And so the chief of every army has to balance the within a set amount of resources, the size of the army, the modernization of the army, and the readiness of the army. So money that's for training and operations and so on. CGS, Chief of General Staff, General Sir Nick Carter, who was my commander in Afghanistan, by the way, and the other leaders of the British Army, I think, have done everything they possibly can to wring out the most out of what they have. And what the British Army always has had is quality officers, quality non-commissioned officers, great young men and women who are deployed around the world all the time. It's just not enough of them. And I think that these are decisions each nation has to make for itself. But I think the British Army has more requirements than it has resources. And so usually, and this is what happened in the U.S. Army, we're paying the price for it right now, modernization became the bill payer in order to meet the force structure requirement and the readiness requirement. So your modernization effort lags behind. And at some point, you start trying to find a way, and I don't know what the British Army is going to do, but in the U.S. Army, we reduced the size of the Army to pay for modernization and readiness. And now we're having to grow the Army back up. Increase the size to meet all the requirements, and so the price will be paid somewhere else.
And talking about modernization, Elon Musk, the entrepreneur and the tech entrepreneur, and about 100 or so other tech entrepreneurs have come up with a sort of a signed declaration they were asking for the UN to ban the development and use of killer robots, now drones, etc., because they think it's going to get out of control, like some sort of a sci-fi film which is looking more and more real. What's your view on that? Is it too late? Is it actually the wrong thing to say?
I don't think I would sign up for something like that because in many ways, even UAVs have actually given us a level of precision that has significantly reduced the numbers of civilian casualties. For example, I mean, killer robot does sound kind of sci-fi-ish and ominous, but if you can use a device that's remotely controlled by a human, it protects that human. So we're talking about reducing the possibility of loss of life. And whether or not the UN or somebody, or there was some big organization that everybody agreed to ban the use, then the only people that would have them would be the terrorist organizations, non-state actors who, I mean, the technology is not that hard to come up with nowadays. So I don't know what in terms of real effect, what good would come out of that.
My last question to you is, having been in the Army for 37 years, what is the one thing that you would do differently? If you could live again, obviously.
I made about every mistake you can make, seriously, and not get sacked from growing up as a junior officer. I've been forgiven for losing equipment, getting lost, failing a mission, those kinds of things. I think I probably invest even more time in subordinates than I did, and I always prided myself on doing that. But I probably could have been a little bit more patient.
And what about engaging more with the wider public?
If the public doesn't support military, not only in practical terms of electing members of Parliament or Congress that are willing to fund the military, but also to encourage young people to want to serve. Coaches, principals, teachers, religious leaders, influencers, to encourage young men and women to want to serve, whether it was for 2 years or 32 years. That's why I look for and welcome every opportunity like the one you've given me here today to talk to people about what it is we do, why it's necessary. To serve for 2 or 3 years is not a lifetime commitment, but it's a way to grow, to give something back, and to get some experiences actually that I think make you maybe even a better citizen when you move on to what it is you really want to do with your life.
Thank you very much, General. And thank you for listening.